Imagine a boy barely in his teens, still sitting at the children's bench for Sunday meals, yet sharp enough to dismantle grown men's lives with nothing but secrets. In the quiet summer of 1952, deep in rural Pennsylvania, 13-year-old Daniel Blackwood revealed a darkness older than himself. On the surface, Daniel looked like any other boy, a plain shirt, a solemn expression, a polite nod to neighbors. But inside, he carried something inherited through generations of men, a shadow that spread like poison through every brother and father before him. That July morning, in a farmhouse ruled by stern discipline, Daniel set in motion a chain of events that wouldn't just end his father's reign. It would twist his bloodline of men into something monstrous, spreading far beyond the walls of that house and into the very fabric of American power. Before we uncover this hidden chapter of history, tap like and subscribe. It helps us share more stories that were buried in locked drawers and forgotten files. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, brother. The Blackwood men were admired in Chester County. Robert Blackwood owned the county's largest grain mill, a towering structure that seemed to hum with prosperity. Neighbors saw his home as a fortress of discipline and respect. Behind the walls of the farmhouse, however, order was something different. Robert ruled with silence, not noise. His commands were subtle, but every son understood them. A glance, a tightened jaw, and rules were enforced. Daniel, the eldest, was unlike his brothers. While the younger boys ran in fields or wrestled in the yard, Daniel lingered in corners, watching. His quiet study of men was unsettling, though unnoticed by most. At meals, Daniel observed his father with careful attention. Robert rarely spoke more than a sentence, but each pause in his chewing, each narrowing of his eyes, carried more weight than lectures from any other man. Michael, the second-born, was fiery and reckless. He often challenged house rules, only to be corrected with sharp words or the back of Robert's hand. Daniel never challenged. He absorbed, memorized, and filed everything away. Grace did not exist here. No softness filled this household of men. The absence of warmth was a lesson in itself. Daniel learned early that survival meant silence, observation, and patience more than playfulness. The farmhouse itself reflected Robert's ideals. Whitewashed boards were scrubbed clean, the yard trimmed without flaw, every tool sharpened and placed perfectly. Order wasn't just preferred, it was demanded, and every son followed or suffered. Inside, the boys grew used to the sound of their father's boots. Each step across hardwood signaled authority. Robert didn't need to shout. His mere presence froze conversation, straightened spines, and corrected behaviors instantly. Daniel understood something his brothers did not. He saw how men outside their home reacted to Robert differently. The mill workers laughed nervously when he passed, but their smiles never reached their eyes. In town, Robert carried weight. A single word could decide whether a man received work, credit, or punishment. Daniel noticed how neighbors adjusted their posture when Robert entered a room. Power radiated quietly. Yet Daniel also recognized cracks. He noticed small tremors in his father's hand when he wrote checks. He noticed whispered exchanges between townsmen when they thought no Blackwood was listening. The world wasn't as solid as it appeared. The younger brothers accepted life as it was. They assumed men simply lived under one man's rule, passing years with labor and obedience. Daniel, though, believed power wasn't just inherited. It could be re-engineered. He began keeping a private record, not written on paper, but etched into memory. Daniel remembered which men borrowed grain without paying. He remembered who lied about debts, who looked away too quickly, who hesitated when speaking. By age 13, Daniel's silence had become a weapon. He rarely raised his voice. He rarely argued. Yet he carried more influence than his brothers realized. He knew more than any boy should. At night, lying awake in the upper room, Daniel listened to his father pacing below. The creak of the floorboards was steady, deliberate, each step a reminder that Robert never slept soundly. The Blackwood men before Robert had lived similarly. Daniel overheard tales from older neighbors about his grandfather's iron control. He pieced together that discipline wasn't just a method here. It was tradition, a male inheritance. But Daniel sensed something sharper within himself. His brothers feared their father's fists. Daniel feared nothing of the sort. His mind didn't flinch. Instead, it calculated, analyzing what weakness might undo even the strongest man. He realized Robert's dominance wasn't absolute. It relied on silence, the silence of sons, workers, and neighbors. What if that silence cracked? What if truths buried in whispers were dragged into daylight? Daniel imagined possibilities. He envisioned how small revelations could shift alliances, turn respect into mockery, strip a man of authority without lifting a hand. It thrilled him to imagine secrets as weapons sharper than steel. The house on Maple Ridge Road became more than a dwelling. To Daniel, it was a laboratory. Every interaction, every argument, every glance between men was part of an experiment he was determined to master. The other boys noticed his detachment. They teased him for his watchful nature, but Daniel never retaliated physically. Instead, he stored every insult, planning carefully how each brother's words might later be used against them. The mill itself fascinated Daniel. Not the machinery or the grain, but the transactions. Men owed Robert favors, debts, promises. Daniel understood that loyalty among men wasn't about love. It was about leverage. One winter afternoon, Daniel saw his father deny credit to a struggling worker. The man's eyes darkened with quiet hatred, but he said nothing. Daniel memorized it. Hate unspoken was still powerful. It lingered. By spring, Daniel's knowledge surpassed any boy his age. His mind was filled with patterns, who held grudges, who bent easily, who followed rules blindly. He understood that every man could be maneuvered like a chess piece. Robert remained oblivious to his son's inner world. To him, Daniel was simply obedient, the least troublesome of his boys. That illusion allowed Daniel the freedom to keep studying without suspicion, an advantage he cultivated carefully. The balance of power in the house seemed secure, but Daniel's perspective was shifting daily. He no longer viewed his father as untouchable. He viewed him as a system, and every system had weak points. Summer heat crept into Chester County, baking the fields. At night, the men opened windows to let in air, but the house never felt lighter. Shadows lingered. Daniel sensed something inevitable drawing closer. The Blackwood bloodline, once seen as strength, was revealing itself differently to him. He saw not discipline, but poison disguised as control, and he wondered if he would inherit it or redefine it entirely. Daniel's decision wasn't made in an instant. It was forged slowly, with each overheard conversation, each tightening of his father's jaw. By the summer of 1952, the boy who watched was preparing to act. The house on Maple Ridge Road still looked perfect from the outside. Neighbors waved, men tipped hats. But inside, a predator was learning to hunt, and he wasn't hunting animals, he was hunting legacies. Daniel had grown into a figure who unsettled even older men without speaking a word. His silence carried a weight, and his eyes saw more than anyone expected from a boy. His brothers laughed, wrestled, and shouted, but Daniel stayed still. He studied body language, noticing how shoulders stiffened at certain words, how eyes betrayed lies, and how clenched fists revealed fear rather than strength. In the mill yard, Daniel lingered near the loading docks, not to help but to listen. Workers shared stories, complaints, and whispered grudges. He filed them away with precision sharper than ledgers. One evening, he overheard two men muttering about missing wages. Their voices dropped low, but Daniel absorbed every word. He understood then, power didn't rest only in wealth, it rested in exposure. Robert, his father, never suspected that Daniel tracked every inconsistency. A delayed delivery, a false promise, an unpaid bill, these were invisible daggers. Daniel sharpened them quietly, preparing for the right moment to strike. Unlike Michael, who acted impulsively, Daniel played the long game. He tested small lies, watching how quickly others believed them. Each successful deception confirmed what he already suspected. Men were easy to manipulate. Daniel tested his skill on his youngest brother, convincing him that shadows in the barn were men spying from town. The boy believed instantly. Daniel laughed quietly, realizing control came not through fists, but illusions. His uncle, visiting from Baltimore one spring, called Daniel a serious lad. The compliment seemed harmless, but Daniel recognized the truth behind it. Men sensed something in him, a calculation most boys lacked. At school, Daniel rarely spoke. Yet he excelled, not because he studied harder, but because he knew how to read teachers. He anticipated questions, predicted punishments, and subtly turned discipline into leniency. One winter morning, Michael broke one of Robert's prized rifles. A beating was certain. Yet Daniel intervened, whispering something into his father's ear. Robert's face turned pale, and punishment never came. Michael was bewildered. That was the moment Daniel felt true power. He hadn't defended his brother. He had leveraged knowledge. He knew of his father's dealings with another man in town, and the secret became protection. Secrets became Daniel's obsession. He sought them like trophies. Every man carried one. Debts, grudges, failures, betrayals. Daniel cataloged them silently. He didn't yet know what he'd do with them, but he knew they mattered. The farmhouse, once a place of routine, became Daniel's hunting ground. His brothers joked, his father commanded, but Daniel gathered fragments of truth like ammunition. Every overheard whisper was a weapon waiting for deployment. At age 13, Daniel had already realized that dominance wasn't inherited. It was engineered. Men rose and fell not because of strength alone, but because of perception. He could change perception with a sentence. The boy who watched now carried invisible armor. While fists bruised and discipline scarred, his mind remained untouchable. His brothers envied his calmness. But Daniel wasn't calm. He was plotting constantly, like a strategist before battle. Robert often underestimated him. He viewed Daniel as obedient, the quiet son who required no correction. That blindness was Daniel's greatest advantage. A predator unnoticed could move freely, shaping events without suspicion. Daniel tested small manipulations at school. He planted doubts between classmates, convincing one that another had mocked him. The resulting fight confirmed what Daniel already knew. Control didn't require strength, just subtle whispers. In town, Daniel observed the sheriff, the banker, the pastor. All respected his father publicly, yet Daniel noticed hesitation in their eyes. Authority, he realized, was never absolute. It depended entirely on perception and secrecy. He noticed his father's contradictions. Robert preached discipline, yet drank heavily at night. He demanded loyalty, yet betrayed his own agreements. Daniel learned that hypocrisy wasn't weakness. It was leverage waiting to be revealed. The boy began experimenting with timing. A comment placed casually could shift an entire room's mood. A well-timed silence could create suspicion where none existed. Daniel mastered pauses as much as words. Men in town underestimated his age. They spoke freely in his presence, assuming boys remembered nothing. Daniel remembered everything. He remembered debts, disputes, and stolen glances. Knowledge flowed into him like water into a reservoir. His younger brothers trusted him, seeking protection from punishments. Daniel never defended them directly. Instead, he orchestrated outcomes, ensuring their safety while quietly increasing their dependence on his decisions. Influence grew quietly, like roots underground. By early summer, Daniel's reputation among boys was strange. Some feared him, others followed him. He never raised his fists, yet conflicts ended in his favor. His weapon wasn't strength, it was foresight. One afternoon, while walking through the mill's office, Daniel found records that didn't add up. Numbers shifted, Signatures looked inconsistent. He smiled faintly, realizing even his father's empire wasn't flawless. Weakness existed everywhere. The boy who watched understood his role. He wasn't merely surviving his father's rule, he was preparing to surpass it. Every whisper, every observation, every secret was another step toward control. By the summer's end, Daniel no longer felt like a boy. His silence had matured into strategy, his patience into power. The watchers of the world often go unnoticed, until it's too late. The men of Chester County still saw Robert Blackwood as unshakable. But Daniel, the quiet son, knew the truth. He had already spotted the cracks, and in his mind, the collapse had begun. Daniel had discovered that while fists could bruise and money could buy, nothing compared to the quiet control of secrets. Among men, reputation was everything. A single truth revealed at the right time could destroy. He began listening more carefully than ever. When his father met with bankers, Daniel leaned by the stairwell, memorizing numbers. When workers argued, he caught the details. Each fragment became a coin stored in his private treasury. Secrets were like currency, but unlike coins, they multiplied when shared carefully. A whisper here, a suggestion there, and suddenly, men's loyalties shifted. Daniel realized this power was more enduring than wealth or fear. His first test came with Michael. The boy had borrowed tools from a neighbor without returning them. Daniel didn't scold him. Instead, he reminded Michael of the act, keeping it for future leverage. Soon after, Daniel used the secret. When Michael resisted helping with chores, Daniel hinted at telling their father about the missing tools. Michael obeyed instantly. Daniel smiled, realizing power didn't require punishment, only suggestion. Daniel expanded his collection beyond brothers. He noted when mill workers cheated weights, when men skipped debts, when conversations shifted nervously. Every flaw was cataloged in his mind, waiting for precise application. One evening, he overheard Robert negotiating with a supplier. The terms were unfair, heavily favoring Blackwood profit. Later, Daniel repeated part of the conversation to a worker. The man's reaction revealed both resentment and fear. Daniel didn't threaten directly. He let information slip, creating tension among men. Suddenly, workers began questioning deals in hushed tones. Daniel had planted distrust without exposing himself. Secrets had begun to bend entire groups. Robert noticed unrest, but didn't trace it to Daniel. He assumed workers were simply ungrateful. Daniel, however, had orchestrated it deliberately. He savored the realization that knowledge alone could ripple outward like a stone in water. In town, Daniel observed men playing cards. He saw how accusations of cheating escalated quickly. But often, truth wasn't needed. Suspicion alone was enough. That lesson burned into his mind. Suspicion itself was currency. He tested this on his youngest brother, whispering that a neighbor had spoken poorly of him. The boy reacted furiously, demanding to know names. Daniel refused, strengthening the suspicion. A seed of anger was planted. The power of secrets wasn't in truth alone, it was in timing. Revealed too early, a secret lost its edge. Revealed too late, it lost its relevance. Daniel practiced striking at perfect moments. He whispered to a mill worker that another man had questioned his loyalty. The worker confronted his companion angrily, never realizing Daniel was the spark. Daniel observed quietly, noting how easily men turned against each other. Every success emboldened him. The more he tested, the more convinced he became that secrets could topple kingdoms, not just households. The Blackwood house was only the beginning. He envisioned reaching far beyond Maple Ridge Road. Robert believed himself untouchable, but Daniel saw through him. He knew of debts hidden in ledgers, of favors owed to men in town. If exposed, these could tarnish Robert's image irreparably. Daniel's mastery grew. He didn't merely collect facts, he crafted narratives. He could turn a harmless debt into a scandal or a trivial mistake into a betrayal. The story mattered more than the truth itself. He realized secrets gave him freedom. Unlike money, which could be stolen, or fists, which weakened with age, secrets grew stronger the longer they remained hidden. His arsenal was invisible, yet devastating. Even his brothers began treating him differently. They feared his silence, never knowing what he might reveal. Daniel never assured them. He let the uncertainty grow, using their unease as another form of control. At 13, Daniel held more influence over his household than any brother dared admit. Even Robert, unknowingly, had become vulnerable. Secrets Daniel held about him were sharper than knives. Daniel knew it was only a matter of time. One afternoon, Daniel deliberately misled Michael, suggesting their father planned to punish him. Michael spent the day trembling, awaiting a beating that never came. Daniel realized fear of exposure could be worse than punishment itself. Secrets shaped behavior. Men adjusted themselves not because they were forced, but because they feared what might be revealed. Daniel recognized this as the ultimate power, guiding men's choices without ever raising his hand. At school, he tested this further. He hinted that a classmate had been overheard mocking another. The resulting fight erupted before Daniel said more than a sentence. He had learned how to weaponize implication alone. The farmhouse walls, once symbols of order, now seemed to Daniel like barriers he was destined to surpass. Secrets would carry him beyond. He wasn't confined by discipline. He was expanding through invisible influence. By midsummer, Daniel's collection was vast. He knew which men borrowed money they couldn't repay, which sons drank behind barns, which uncles stole from accounts. To him, each detail was a brick in his empire. Robert remained oblivious. He mistook Daniel's silence for obedience, never realizing that silence concealed an arsenal. Every quiet evening, Daniel sharpened his memory, building a treasury more powerful than grain, money, or physical strength. The boy who watched had transformed. He was no longer passive. He was a collector, a strategist, a manipulator. Secrets had become his currency, and already he was spending them with devastating precision. The Blackwood legacy, Daniel realized, wasn't iron fists or loud commands. It was the ability to poison quietly, to corrode trust among men. And he, more than any Blackwood before, understood how to perfect it. Daniel had practiced small manipulations, but now he wanted to attempt something greater. His brother was the perfect subject. Unlike townsmen, brothers were close, trusting, and vulnerable. That trust made them ideal for controlled experiments. He chose Michael as his first real test. Michael's fiery nature often put him at odds with their father, and Daniel knew that by steering his emotions, he could create predictable reactions. The first step was planting doubt. Daniel mentioned casually that a neighbor had mocked Michael's strength. The comment seemed harmless, but Michael brooded over it for days. His pride stung deeper than he admitted. Daniel then escalated. He left subtle hints, unfinished sentences, vague gestures, suggesting another brother had repeated the insult. Michael began watching them suspiciously, unsure whom to trust, yet too embarrassed to ask. The household grew tense. Daniel observed with satisfaction as Michael's once carefree energy hardened into suspicion. He had proven how easily perception could be shifted without physical force, only with carefully chosen words. To test further, Daniel staged evidence. He left a borrowed tool where Michael would find it, claiming another brother had hidden it. Michael erupted in anger, demanding explanations. Conflict flared, and Daniel quietly studied it. Each reaction confirmed Daniel's theory. Manipulation wasn't about lies alone. It was about timing, reinforcement, and playing on weaknesses already present. Michael's pride was his leash, and Daniel held it firmly. Their father noticed quarrels among the boys, but dismissed them as youthful rivalry. He had no idea Daniel was orchestrating everything, guiding arguments like a puppeteer pulling invisible strings in perfect rhythm. The experiments didn't stop with conflict. Daniel also tested loyalty. He whispered that their father planned harsher punishments for Michael. Michael grew fearful, increasingly turning to Daniel for protection. Dependence was another form of power. Daniel began creating divisions intentionally. He told Michael that one brother secretly sought their father's approval at Michael's expense. The result was bitterness, another fracture widening within the brotherhood. Daniel cataloged every effect with care. At school, Daniel refined his techniques. He tested misinformation among classmates, watching how quickly rumors could spread. Each boy's response mirrored what he'd already seen in Michael. Daniel's theories were proving universally reliable. One evening, he asked Michael to deliver a false story about a worker. Michael obeyed without hesitation, believing Daniel's word implicitly. The worker's reaction proved Daniel's reach extended beyond home. His brother had become a tool. The realization thrilled him. His brother, once independent, now acted under Daniel's direction unknowingly. Influence over a brother was influence multiplied because brothers could carry stories into wider circles, spreading Daniel's experiments into the community. Yet Daniel was careful. He never revealed his hand fully. To Michael, he remained the protective elder brother, guiding him away from trouble. In truth, Daniel was cultivating him as a controlled subject. By summer, Michael no longer questioned Daniel's advice. Every doubt Daniel planted grew into conviction. Every story he crafted became Michael's truth. The experiment was succeeding far beyond what Daniel first envisioned. He understood now that loyalty could be engineered, not through affection, not through blood, but through dependency. Michael's reliance on Daniel's interpretations had transformed him from brother to follower. Daniel had gained his first disciple. The farmhouse, once ruled entirely by Robert, had quietly shifted. The sons no longer looked solely to their father for authority. Michael, in particular, obeyed Daniel's unspoken cues more readily than Robert's commands. Robert didn't notice the shift. His attention was consumed by business pressures and community expectations. Meanwhile, Daniel smiled silently, knowing he had proven his ability to undermine authority without confrontation, simply by controlling perception. Daniel pressed further, orchestrating an argument between Michael and another brother. He seeded doubts, supplied false evidence, then stepped aside to watch. The conflict exploded, confirming once again the effectiveness of manufactured suspicion. Through it all, Daniel remained outwardly innocent. He presented himself as mediator, calming disputes, even while he was the source. His ability to manipulate situations while appearing detached was his most dangerous weapon. Each test made him more confident. He wasn't merely influencing his brothers, he was conditioning them, teaching them unconsciously to respond to his cues. Their reactions became predictable, and predictable men were easy to control. Daniel realized his household was becoming a proving ground for larger ambitions. If brothers could be steered with lies, half-truths, and hints, then townsmen and leaders could be controlled on an even greater scale. By autumn, Daniel no longer viewed Michael as an equal. He viewed him as a specimen. Every conversation, every reaction was another data point in his growing understanding of manipulation as a science. The boy who watched had evolved. Now he was the boy who experimented, tested, and perfected. His brother was no longer just kin. He was proof that control could be manufactured deliberately. The cracks in the Blackwood household widened quietly. Robert still believed he commanded absolute loyalty, but Daniel knew better. The true allegiance of at least one son already belonged elsewhere, to him. Daniel's success with Michael confirmed what he had always suspected. Power wasn't inherited, it was built. And he was building it daily, using brothers as the foundation stones for something far greater. The experiment ended not with a revelation, but with a certainty. Daniel had mastered influence over one brother. Tomorrow, he knew, he could extend it further. The path toward dominance was clear, and he was ready. Robert Blackwood had ruled his household and his mill with iron authority for years. To neighbors, he was unbreakable. To his sons, he was law. But Daniel knew every fortress contained weaknesses. It began with whispers. Daniel spread small fragments about late payments, about questionable decisions, about debts that lingered longer than men expected. He never accused directly. He simply allowed suspicion to take root among workers. The workers' loyalty, once firm, began to tremble. Jokes about Robert's sharp discipline turned into muttered complaints. Each laugh carried bitterness now. Daniel had seeded the idea that perhaps Robert wasn't as untouchable as believed. At home, Daniel heightened tension. He reminded his brothers of punishments, emphasized Robert's inconsistencies, and allowed resentment to grow unchecked. The father who once commanded obedience began facing quiet resistance. Daniel orchestrated it silently. Robert's authority weakened further when Daniel revealed a personal flaw. He whispered to Michael about secret dealings Robert had made with a local merchant. The revelation fractured Michael's respect permanently. His loyalty shifted closer to Daniel. Daniel then targeted Robert's standing in town. He asked questions innocently, planting doubt. "Why is father meeting that banker so late?" he'd say. Men, overhearing him, began to question Robert's intentions without proof. Each seed grew. By summer, Robert's image of strength was cracking. Transactions fell through. Loans tightened. Men who once feared him now hesitated before offering allegiance. Daniel's manipulation was reshaping the man's reputation invisibly. Inside the farmhouse, Daniel pressed harder. He deliberately provoked small failures, a tool misplaced, a message misdelivered. When Robert scolded his sons, resentment grew. Each mistake felt heavier, eroding confidence in their father's control. Michael became Daniel's strongest ally, though he never realized it. Each doubt Daniel whispered about their father turned into conviction. By now, Michael believed Robert was losing grip, and he leaned increasingly on Daniel. The younger brother, too, felt unease. He couldn't articulate it, but he sensed a shift. Daniel nurtured that unease, ensuring the boy no longer saw Robert as invincible, but as fallible and fading. Robert himself grew more volatile. He drank later into the night, footsteps heavier across floorboards. He barked orders sharper, angrier. The more he sensed control slipping, the harder he tried to reclaim it. Daniel smiled quietly. He had engineered the pressure. Robert's temper no longer inspired fear. It inspired doubt. Every outburst proved Daniel's theory that power wasn't lost suddenly. It decayed slowly under quiet sabotage. In the mill, Daniel's influence spread further. Workers confided in him, believing the quiet boy harmless. He listened, guided conversations, and redirected frustrations toward Robert. His father's own employees were unknowingly helping dismantle his authority. Townsmen noticed the shift. Where once Robert commanded respect, now they exchanged uneasy glances when his name was mentioned. The mill's reputation slipped, not from scandal, but from Daniel's carefully orchestrated erosion of trust. Daniel no longer needed to lie directly. He merely echoed truths selectively, amplifying flaws, repeating failures at key moments. His father's reputation collapsed not from a single blow, but from endless invisible cuts. Robert tried asserting himself harder at home, punishing minor mistakes brutally. But Daniel had already prepared. He whispered to his brothers that such punishments came from fear, not strength. The message stuck, deepening their rebellion. By autumn, Robert's household no longer obeyed with the same discipline. His sons hesitated when ordered, exchanged glances, delayed responses. Daniel encouraged these small acts, knowing hesitation itself weakened Robert's authority more than defiance. The grain mill's finances worsened. Creditors pressed harder. Daniel knew why. His own seeds had spread among bankers, who now doubted Robert's reliability. Deals fell apart. Contracts crumbled. Robert's empire shook under unseen pressure. Robert's anger turned desperate. He accused workers of betrayal, but they denied it. He lashed out at sons, but they withdrew further. His dominance was unraveling, strand by strand, while Daniel quietly tightened the threads. Michael asked Daniel if their father was failing. Daniel answered only with silence and a knowing look. That silence spoke louder than words, confirming suspicions. Michael no longer sought Robert's approval. He sought Daniel's. The youngest brother mirrored Michael's shift. He trusted Daniel's judgment more than Robert's authority. Daniel had become the unseen center of the household. The father remained present, but his influence was hollow. Neighbors whispered about Robert's decline. They noticed unpaid debts, delayed harvests, quieter dinners at the Blackwood home. Daniel never denied these rumors. He simply allowed them to grow unchecked, each whisper another crack in the foundation. Robert felt trapped. The man who once ruled with unshakable certainty now looked over his shoulder constantly. He suspected betrayal, but couldn't name its source. Daniel ensured his father fought shadows, never the true enemy. Daniel remained outwardly obedient. He continued eating quietly, performing chores, bowing his head when spoken to. But behind his calm eyes lay triumph. He was dismantling his father piece by piece, unseen and unstoppable. By winter, Robert's decline was undeniable. His word no longer carried weight in town. His household no longer feared him fully. His empire of grain and authority was collapsing, orchestrated by his own son. The fall wasn't sudden. It was slow, deliberate, engineered. Daniel knew this made it permanent. A sudden blow could be forgiven, but a gradual collapse left scars in every mind, scars that could never heal. The boy who once watched now ruled silently. His father remained alive, but his authority was gone, and Daniel, cold and calculating, had proven that even the mightiest father could be reduced to ruin. The fall of the father was complete in Daniel's mind. Robert no longer stood as the symbol of Blackwood power. Daniel had assumed that mantle already, hidden behind the quiet mask of a son. The tension inside the farmhouse had reached a breaking point. Robert Blackwood, once unshakable, staggered beneath the weight of debt, whispers, and betrayal. Daniel sat quietly, watching the storm gather, calculating what must come next. It was a sweltering morning in July when the final confrontation erupted. The windows were open, yet no breeze cooled the heavy air. The household felt suffocated, each man sensing an inevitable collision approaching. Robert had drunk heavily the night before. Empty bottles still lay scattered in the study. His footsteps across the floorboards were uneven, but his anger was sharp. He stormed toward the kitchen with purpose. Daniel sat at the table, calmly eating oatmeal, his eyes never leaving his father's figure. Michael and the youngest brother froze in the living room, uncertain, their world about to collapse. Robert's voice cracked with rage. He accused Daniel of orchestrating his downfall, of poisoning his name in town, of turning brothers against him. His face burned crimson, veins bulging, fury consuming every word. Daniel didn't flinch. He spooned another bite into his mouth, gaze fixed on his father. The silence mocked Robert more than words could. It was the silence of calculated defiance. Robert's rage exploded. He lunged across the room, gripping Daniel by the throat and lifting him from his chair. His drunken breath stank of bitterness, his eyes blazing with a fury beyond reason. "You destroyed everything," Robert snarled, spittle flying. "But you forgot one thing. I'm still your father. A father's authority never ends." His grip tightened, intent on ending Daniel's rise with violence. Michael shouted in panic, but Daniel remained eerily calm. His hands clutched the table for leverage, his mind already racing ahead, searching for the decisive move that would end the standoff forever. Robert's hand reached toward the carving knife resting on the counter. His intent was clear. If Daniel threatened the bloodline, Robert would erase it himself, even if it meant spilling blood in his kitchen. But Daniel moved first. His hand seized the heavy cast-iron skillet resting on the stove. With one swift, calculated swing, he brought it crashing against Robert's skull with bone-shaking force. The sound echoed like a muted bell struck underwater. Robert staggered backward, releasing Daniel's throat. Blood streamed from his head, dripping onto the floorboards, staining the same kitchen where discipline had been enforced for years. Michael froze in horror, while the youngest brother whimpered softly. Daniel, however, stood firm, skillet still raised. His breathing was steady, his eyes cold. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. Robert attempted to rise, swaying unsteadily. His hands clutched the counter for support. His eyes met Daniel's, and for the first time, fear flickered across the father's hardened face. He realized his reign was ending. Daniel struck again, the skillet slamming down with finality. Robert collapsed fully, his body crumpling onto the floor. Blood pooled beneath his head, mixing with dust and sweat, a dark signature of his fall. The silence afterward was deafening. Michael trembled, unable to process what had just occurred. The youngest brother clung to the table leg, eyes wide. Only Daniel seemed untouched, as if he'd expected this outcome all along. Daniel lowered the skillet carefully, setting it back on the stove. His composure unsettled his brothers more than the violence itself. It was as though he had merely completed a planned task. Michael whispered, "What have you done?" His voice cracked with disbelief. Daniel turned his gaze upon him, calm and unflinching. "I ended what was already dying," he said. "Our father's reign ended here." The youngest brother wept softly, but Daniel offered no comfort. Instead, he observed the scene clinically, memorizing every detail. The blood, the silence, the fear. It was evidence of power gained through decisive action. Robert's body lay still, the household throne now empty. Daniel realized his plan had worked perfectly. He hadn't just dismantled his father's authority, he had destroyed the man himself. The final obstacle was gone. Michael's fear soon shifted into dependency. He asked, "What do we do now?" Daniel knew the answer instantly. "We survive," he said coldly, "and survival requires loyalty. Remember who ended his rule." The brothers nodded reluctantly. They had witnessed Daniel's power firsthand. Fear and awe bound them to him now. The household no longer belonged to Robert. It belonged to the son who wielded silence and steel. Outside, neighbors worked fields unaware of the collapse within the Blackwood home. The house still looked strong, but its foundation had shifted forever. Daniel had claimed dominion, and no one beyond those walls knew. The kitchen floor, once a place of meals and lectures, was now an altar to transformation. Robert's blood symbolized the death of one Blackwood era and the birth of something darker, more dangerous. Daniel stood over his father's body with no remorse. He saw not tragedy but inevitability. He had proven that power was seized, not inherited. The Blackwood bloodline was his now, reshaped by his own hand. The confrontation ended not with justice or reconciliation, but with cold certainty. Daniel had survived, and survival was victory. The kitchen, filled with silence and fear, had crowned a new master, the boy who killed. From that morning onward, the household would never again view Robert as its foundation. Daniel's authority was unspoken yet absolute. He had struck, he had survived, and he had become the architect of his bloodline. The kitchen confrontation was complete. The father's body grew cold on the floor, while Daniel's eyes gleamed with a chilling awareness. He had inherited nothing. He had taken everything. The reign of the son had begun. The morning after Robert's death, the household stood divided between fear and relief. To neighbors, the story would be simple: a son protecting his brothers from a drunken father. But Daniel knew better. Michael whispered the official version to townsmen who asked. He painted Daniel as a hero who saved his brothers. Men in town nodded approvingly, eager to support a tale of courage and survival. The sheriff, a longtime acquaintance of Robert, inspected the scene briefly. He accepted the explanation quickly, unwilling to dig deeper. Daniel's quiet demeanor reinforced the illusion of innocence, shielding him from suspicion. Yet inside the household, the truth remained undeniable. Michael had seen the calculated swing, the cold gaze. The youngest brother had watched too. They understood this wasn't chance. It was design. Daniel's composure unsettled them most. While Robert's body was removed and whispers spread, Daniel ate his meal calmly, as if nothing unusual had occurred. His silence was more frightening than shouting could ever be. Townsmen rallied around the boys, bringing food, offering assistance. They spoke of Daniel as an example of bravery, a son who had stood firm when no one else could. Daniel accepted their praise quietly. Behind closed doors, Michael confronted him. "You planned it," he hissed. Daniel didn't deny it. He simply replied, "He would have destroyed us eventually. I ended it on my terms." Michael recoiled at the bluntness. He realized then that Daniel hadn't just protected them. He had orchestrated everything. The fall of their father, the confrontation, the killing, all pieces in a larger game. The youngest brother asked timidly if they were safe now. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Safe," he said, though his tone suggested something darker. Safety, to Daniel, meant obedience and control. The household quickly adapted to the new reality. Without Robert's booming presence, Daniel's quiet authority filled the void. His brothers listened more closely, followed more readily, unsure whether they feared or respected him more. In town, Daniel's reputation grew. Men praised his composure, marveling at his calm testimony before officials. They saw a boy carrying burdens beyond his years, a figure worthy of admiration. None saw the predator. Daniel observed their praise with amusement. To him, admiration was another form of control. If men believed he was a hero, they would never suspect the manipulations that had made him powerful. At night, Michael whispered doubts. He asked if their father's fall had been engineered. Daniel answered only with silence. That silence confirmed everything. Michael knew he lived under his brother's shadow, unable to escape. The youngest brother clung to Daniel constantly, seeking reassurance. Daniel welcomed it. Every question, every plea reinforced his dominance. Loyalty born from fear was more durable than loyalty born from affection. He cultivated it deliberately. The sheriff praised Daniel openly in town gatherings. "A brave son," he called him. Men nodded, repeating the sentiment. None realized the sheriff himself carried secrets Daniel already held, ensuring his cooperation indefinitely. Daniel considered the irony. The same men who whispered about Robert's cruelty now applauded his downfall. Yet they never saw the architect behind it. They believed fate had acted, not a calculating son. Michael's unease deepened. He saw Daniel receive respect their father had once demanded. He knew his brother hadn't just inherited power, he had manufactured it. That realization filled Michael with equal parts fear and awe. Daniel embraced the duality. To the world, he was a savior. To his brothers, he was something colder. A strategist who understood survival meant striking before others suspected. Both images served his purpose. As days passed, the household no longer resembled one under mourning. Daniel enforced order with calm precision. Meals continued, chores were done, but everything operated around his quiet gaze. Authority had shifted permanently. The youngest brother told a neighbor Daniel had saved them. The neighbor smiled proudly, promising to help however he could. Daniel noted the ease with which men believed crafted stories over messy truths. In the mill, workers offered Daniel small nods of respect. He was no longer just a boy. He was the son who had survived his father's wrath. That title carried unspoken influence. Daniel recognized the advantage. With each sympathetic glance, with each word of praise, his network of influence widened. Men offered support willingly, never realizing they were stepping into his web of control. At night, he reflected on his dual identity: hero in public, predator in truth. The balance thrilled him. To manipulate perception so completely was proof that his mastery of control was nearly flawless. Michael struggled with silence. He wanted to tell the truth, to warn others. But Daniel's calm eyes and steady presence silenced him. He realized no one would believe him anyway. The world wanted a hero. The youngest brother idolized Daniel, convinced he was their savior. Daniel encouraged it, knowing blind loyalty was his most reliable weapon. A follower shaped by admiration was easier to guide than one shaped by fear. The town's support grew. Men brought supplies, extended favors, offered words of encouragement. They thought they were helping orphans. In reality, they were strengthening the foundation of Daniel's emerging reign. Daniel stood at the center of it all, watching with cold satisfaction. His father was gone, yet his influence spread further than ever. He had proven survival required control, and control required deception. The kitchen confrontation had crowned him master, but the aftermath had crowned him something greater. He wasn't just the boy who killed his father, he was now the boy who mastered the mask of heroism. When the Blackwood brothers were separated after Robert's death, townsmen assumed distance would heal wounds. They believed each boy would grow in healthier soil. But wherever a Blackwood son settled, calamity soon followed. Michael was sent to live with a mill foreman in Pittsburgh. At first, order seemed possible. But within a year, strange misfortunes plagued the household, unraveling stability that once seemed unshakable. The foreman, once reliable, lost his position after accusations of theft emerged. No proof was ever found, yet whispers spread fast. The scandal crippled him. Michael's presence coincided with the sudden collapse of reputation. The youngest brother went to stay with an uncle in Ohio. At first, the household seemed calm, but gradually tension rose, debts grew, and arguments escalated until the men inside despised one another. The uncle, admired for decades, suddenly gambled away savings. He claimed misfortune drove him, yet others suspected manipulation. The Blackwood boy always lingered nearby, watching. Misfortune seemed to sprout wherever his quiet gaze remained. Even distant relatives noticed strange patterns. Men who offered help often found themselves ruined within months. Businesses failed, friendships shattered, trust corroded. Wherever a Blackwood son resided, the soil turned poisonous beneath men's feet. Daniel, meanwhile, thrived in Baltimore under his uncle Charles. Unlike other caretakers, Charles recognized the darkness in him. Instead of resisting it, he nurtured it, teaching Daniel how misfortune could be transformed into opportunity. While his brothers brought ruin unknowingly, Daniel wielded ruin deliberately. He directed accidents, engineered failures, and guided men into choices that destroyed them. Misfortune wasn't coincidence. It was cultivation, grown with precision by his hands. Michael's foster household burned one winter night. Investigators claimed a faulty stove. Yet Daniel had written letters weeks earlier mentioning lapses in insurance coverage. Somehow the policy had lapsed just before the fire consumed everything. The youngest brother's household fractured into violence. Accusations of theft, betrayal, and deception tore men apart. Neighbors whispered that the boy brought bad luck, though none dared say it aloud. They only watched his shadow. By now, whispers about the Blackwood bloodline had returned. Old men in Chester County remembered stories about Robert's father, about strange collapses tied to the family. The curse of misfortune seemed alive again. Daniel encouraged these whispers when convenient. He dropped hints to trusted ears, fueling the legend. A cursed reputation was useful. It distracted men from the calculated precision behind his manipulations, keeping suspicion elsewhere. The brothers themselves didn't fully understand their influence. Michael grew bitter, believing fate had marked him. The youngest brother feared himself. Daniel alone embraced the truth. Misfortune wasn't random. It was a weapon perfected by their line. In Baltimore, Daniel refined this craft further. He studied business ledgers, orchestrating collapses. Rivals of his uncle lost contracts mysteriously. Ships sank under suspicious conditions. Yet Daniel left no trace, only devastation in his wake. Uncle Charles praised Daniel's cunning. Unlike other men, he wasn't horrified by the boy's skill. He saw potential, a partner who could elevate schemes beyond petty survival into empire building. Together, they thrived on others' ruin. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, men whispered about accidents. A banker who denied Michael's request lost everything in a fire. A merchant who mistreated the youngest brother was arrested for fraud. Coincidence piled too high to ignore. The Blackwood name became feared. Men no longer spoke of discipline or strength. They spoke of ruin. To be connected with a Blackwood son was to invite disaster, no matter the intention. Daniel viewed his brother's misfortunes as validation. Even without full awareness, they carried poison in their blood. He, however, carried it with understanding. He didn't spread misfortune blindly. He directed it surgically. By adolescence, Daniel recognized their legacy clearly. His brothers were seeds scattered by chance, sprouting chaos wherever they landed. But he was the gardener, cultivating ruin into an organized pattern of control. Neighbors who once pitied the boys now avoided them. Men crossed streets rather than meet their eyes. The curse was no longer hidden. It breathed openly in whispers and avoidance across towns. Michael withdrew into isolation. He distrusted every man around him, convinced betrayal was inevitable. Daniel had planted those thoughts years earlier. Now they matured, leaving his brother trapped in paranoia, a prisoner of his own mind. The youngest brother clung desperately to companionship, but poisoned it unconsciously. Friends turned enemies, mentors failed, households collapsed. His presence corroded loyalty, leaving only suspicion. Even he began to believe he was cursed. Daniel alone celebrated the pattern. Each misfortune expanded his legend, strengthening his image as inevitable. Men feared him without understanding why. And fear was more valuable to him than respect could ever be. The seeds of misfortune spread like roots beneath soil, invisible yet unstoppable. Daniel cultivated them deliberately, ensuring that the Blackwood legacy extended not just through blood, but through destruction sown across households and communities. By the time Daniel reached manhood, entire regions whispered about his line. No matter where a Blackwood son appeared, collapse followed. To Daniel, this wasn't a curse. It was destiny, and his weapon. The seeds had been planted successfully. Now they only needed harvesting. Daniel smiled as he realized misfortune was no longer coincidence. It was his inheritance, his instrument, and his guarantee of control over men forever. When Daniel arrived in Baltimore, he entered a different world. The city bustled with commerce, ambition, and power. His uncle Charles welcomed him not with pity, but with recognition, one predator acknowledging another. Charles had built a shipping company through ruthless tactics. He understood deception, contracts twisted with fine print, and rivals destroyed by sudden misfortune. When he looked at Daniel, he saw not a boy, but an heir. Unlike townsmen in Chester County, Charles didn't underestimate him. He invited Daniel into meetings, letting him watch men argue over tariffs, debts, and ports. Daniel absorbed everything, silently cataloging weakness like he had back home. By 15, Daniel was indispensable. He managed correspondence, tracked deals, and quietly advised Charles on who could be trusted. His uncle noticed the accuracy of Daniel's insights and began relying on him more. Daniel's first real strike came against a rival shipping company. He noticed discrepancies in cargo records. Instead of exposing them directly, he whispered suggestions to creditors. Within months, the rival collapsed under suspicion and debt. Charles was impressed. He called Daniel sharper than men twice his age. Daniel didn't gloat. He simply noted that secrets, once again, proved more powerful than fists, contracts, or even ships. The Baltimore docks became his laboratory. Workers grumbled about pay, captains lied about routes, merchants inflated accounts. Daniel collected every secret, storing them until the right time. With precision, he turned whispers into leverage. He moved beyond business. He studied politicians who relied on shipping for funding. He discovered debts hidden in ledgers, bribes disguised as fees, and favors owed quietly. Each man's weakness became another chain in Daniel's grasp. By 16, Daniel wasn't just Charles's assistant. He was his partner. He advised which men to bribe, which to ruin, and which to cultivate. Charles trusted him completely, a dangerous mistake in itself. Daniel saw through his uncle's carefully crafted empire. He uncovered that Charles had faked his own death years earlier to escape charges. Instead of exposing him, Daniel used the secret as leverage. The revelation didn't shock Daniel, it thrilled him. He had his uncle exactly where he wanted him. Charles became not just mentor but captive, bound by Daniel's silence. The student had surpassed the teacher. Together they built something larger than a shipping empire. They extended into banking, real estate, and politics. Daniel always insisted on silence, invisibility, and patience. Power didn't need to announce itself to dominate completely. Rivals collapsed mysteriously. Contracts vanished. Investigations stalled. Daniel orchestrated outcomes so carefully that men believed misfortune or incompetence caused their downfall. In reality, each ruin was planted, watered, and harvested by Daniel himself. Baltimore soon whispered about the Blackwood nephew. Men said he had a mind like steel, that he could read lies in an instant. They respected him, though their respect was laced with fear. Charles thrived with Daniel at his side. Yet he understood his own survival depended entirely on Daniel's favor. The boy had become indispensable, and indispensable men could never be controlled, only partnered. Daniel studied psychology, law, and finance with obsessive focus. He didn't care about credentials, he cared about tactics. Every theory he read became a tool sharpened for manipulation. Knowledge wasn't learning, it was weaponry. He experimented constantly. He tested whether silence in negotiations forced concessions. He discovered men filled quiet moments with weakness, revealing more than they intended. Daniel mastered silence as his sharpest blade. The city offered endless opportunities. Unlike the farmhouse, where his experiments were confined to brothers, Baltimore gave him a stage of merchants, bankers, politicians, and captains. Each one became another specimen in his study. Daniel grew adept at disguising his predation. He spoke politely, dressed plainly, and projected humility. Men lowered their guard around him, believing him harmless. He relished how easily masks could blind entire rooms. By 17, he was feared quietly, but never openly. Rivals avoided confronting him directly. Allies sought his favor desperately. He had woven himself into the fabric of Baltimore's power without ever raising his voice. Uncle Charles often toasted Daniel's brilliance at private dinners. But Daniel never let the praise distract him. He knew admiration was another form of weakness. The moment Charles slipped, Daniel would seize everything. He tested his control further. He manipulated market rumors, sparking panic among investors. Stocks plummeted. Competitors lost fortunes. Then, at the perfect moment, Daniel bought assets cheaply, rebuilding wealth under his name. Charles laughed in admiration, but Daniel's smile was colder. He wasn't building wealth for luxury. He was building systems, networks of dependency that ensured men could never escape his influence. Baltimore, once just a city of docks, had become his domain. Men bowed to him without realizing it. Every deal, every contract, every whispered rumor moved under his invisible hand. The ascent was complete. Daniel had transformed from a boy who destroyed his father into a strategist shaping cities. Baltimore was only the beginning. He already envisioned his reach stretching far beyond its harbor. The predator who once watched silently from farmhouse shadows now directed empires from boardrooms. His uncle remained the face, but Daniel was the architect. The Blackwood curse had found its most perfected vessel, and Daniel, standing at the height of his youth, knew with chilling certainty that no man in Baltimore, or beyond, would ever see the strike until it was far too late. By the early 1960s, Daniel no longer thought of himself as a survivor. He thought of himself as a founder. His legacy would not stop with him. It would continue through sons. He chose his path deliberately. Where other men stumbled into fatherhood, Daniel engineered it. He selected partners for alliances, for power, for influence, ensuring that every son born would serve a calculated purpose. Daniel studied heredity and behavior obsessively. He devoured books on psychology and genetics, not for science, but for strategy. He believed darkness in the Blackwood line could be refined, distilled, and perfected in future generations. His first son, James, arrived in 1964. Daniel treated him not with affection, but with training. By age 6, James could manipulate teachers into praise while quietly undermining classmates who threatened his position. 2 years later, Nathan was born. From the start, Daniel cultivated his obsession with numbers. By age 10, Nathan discovered ways to bankrupt competitors through loopholes. Daniel encouraged this talent, molding him into a financial predator. In 1968, another son, Victoria, entered the world. But in Daniel's universe, this name became Victor. Victor learned psychology early, dissecting men's fears. By adolescence, he wielded insecurities like knives, cutting rivals apart without effort. Finally, in 1970, Alexander arrived. From his earliest days, Alexander displayed a unique skill: concealment. Unlike his brothers, who showed brilliance openly, Alexander cloaked his talents behind charm, becoming undetectable while poisoning every bond he touched. Daniel raised these sons with precision. There was no tenderness, only instruction. Each boy became an instrument sharpened for influence. They weren't nurtured. They were engineered, the culmination of generations of poisonous Blackwood design. By 10, James orchestrated entire classrooms. He persuaded teachers into leniency, then turned classmates against one another. When accused, he smiled innocently, never caught. Daniel applauded his mastery of appearing righteous while being ruthless. Nathan's obsession with numbers evolved into dominance. By adolescence, he manipulated ledgers to bankrupt competitors in simulations Daniel arranged. The boy thrived on destruction hidden beneath legality, fulfilling his father's vision of financial weaponry. Victor perfected psychological torment. He exploited secrets of peers, twisting friendships into rivalries. By 15, he made strong men doubt themselves, eroding confidence until they broke. Daniel admired the surgical precision of Victor's cruelty. Alexander, though youngest, surpassed them all. He concealed malice completely, moving unseen. Men adored him, trusted him, confided in him, never realizing he dismantled them slowly. Daniel recognized Alexander as the purest predator. The sons were not raised to love one another. They were raised to compete, sharpening their skills against brothers. Daniel believed rivalry forged sharper weapons than harmony ever could. The household became a crucible of conflict. At dinners, Daniel presented scenarios, moral dilemmas, strategic puzzles, impossible choices. He forced his sons to answer, then dismantled their reasoning. It wasn't discipline, it was training. Every word prepared them for control. James thrived on manipulation of authority figures. Nathan thrived on calculated ruin. Victor thrived on fear. Alexander thrived on invisibility. Together, they represented a perfected arsenal. Daniel's curse had become a dynasty of male predators. In Baltimore, whispers spread about the Blackwood heirs. Men noted their intelligence, their charm, their potential. None realized these boys weren't heirs in the traditional sense. They were weapons bred for conquest. Daniel often compared them privately. James was brilliant but obvious. Nathan was powerful but traceable. Victor was cruel but exposed. Only Alexander carried the complete mask. He was invisible poison, indistinguishable from loyalty itself. The Blackwood household in Baltimore was nothing like the farmhouse of Pennsylvania. There were no accidents here. Every conversation, every gesture, every lesson was engineered. The sons were raised as predators disguised as men. Uncle Charles watched with fascination. He praised Daniel's methods, calling the boys remarkable. But Charles also understood the truth. He was witnessing the creation of something unnatural, a lineage where every son was weaponized. By their teenage years, the sons infiltrated schools, clubs, and businesses. They didn't just succeed. They dismantled competition methodically, leaving peers broken. Teachers admired them. Employers trusted them. Rivals collapsed, unaware of who had struck. James controlled through charm. Nathan ruined through money. Victor destabilized through fear. Alexander thrived in shadows. Each boy reflected a piece of Daniel, yet Alexander alone embodied the full Blackwood curse perfected. Daniel watched them with satisfaction. He had built his dynasty deliberately. The Blackwood curse, once an accident of inheritance, was now a program of breeding, refinement, and strategy. The future belonged entirely to his sons. The city whispered more with each passing year. Men spoke of the Blackwood heirs with admiration, but privately they feared them. Wherever the boys walked, men's fortunes shifted, friendships shattered, and institutions weakened. Baltimore itself became a proving ground. Schools, clubs, businesses, all bore scars of Blackwood influence. Yet none could accuse directly. The sons left no fingerprints. They only left ruin hidden behind respectable masks. Daniel knew this was only the beginning. His sons were not merely continuing his legacy, they were surpassing it. Each carried poison in his veins, refined and sharpened for broader arenas of power. The dynasty was set. The curse was no longer curse. It was weaponized bloodline. Through these sons, Daniel ensured the Blackwood shadow would stretch across generations, spreading influence invisibly into the marrow of society. What began in a farmhouse kitchen had evolved into empire. Daniel had destroyed his father, but through his sons, he had ensured countless fathers would fall. The Blackwood curse was alive, refined, and unstoppable. The sons of the curse stood ready. Daniel watched them, satisfied. They weren't merely his heirs, they were his weapons, and through them, the world itself would become the next laboratory of Blackwood control. By the 1980s, the Blackwood sons were no longer confined to schools or local businesses. They had moved upward, embedding themselves into institutions of law, finance, politics, and media. Their reach stretched invisibly. James rose first, using charm to cultivate alliances. He established a foundation that financed political candidates. To the public, he was a generous patron. Privately, his money came with strings that bound men permanently. Nathan built an investment firm with astonishing speed. He purchased failing newspapers across 12 states, quietly controlling what stories were printed. By silencing investigations and redirecting narratives, he shaped public perception without ever appearing in headlines. Victor established a psychology practice disguised as academic research. He encouraged men to confess secrets, promising guidance. Those secrets became leverage, each confession cataloged and repurposed to manipulate employers, politicians, and business leaders alike. Alexander perfected invisibility. He joined charities, boards, and civic councils. Men saw only a loyal ally, a trusted advisor. Behind closed doors, he siphoned funds, directed influence, and dismantled rivals without anyone suspecting his hand. Together, the brothers extended Daniel's empire beyond Baltimore. They poisoned institutions from within. Banks collapsed, elections shifted, corporations folded, all while Blackwood's sons smiled publicly, hiding predation beneath the mask of respectability. Daniel, though aging, observed with satisfaction. His sons were executing precisely what he had envisioned. They weren't conquerors with armies. They were infiltrators, bending entire systems without drawing attention to themselves. James expanded into Washington. Senators and governors accepted his funding eagerly, unaware that debts tied them permanently. Laws shifted subtly in his favor. Entire legislative sessions bent toward Blackwood interests, disguised as political coincidence. Nathan targeted financial markets directly. He shorted industries before orchestrating collapses. Rivals accused one another, but none saw the unseen hand guiding every downturn. His power was not in wealth itself, but in engineered scarcity. Victor thrived in corporate boardrooms. He exploited insecurities of executives, turning ambition into self-destruction. Men who sought his advice often destroyed themselves following his guidance. He harvested their downfall, inheriting power disguised as mentorship. Alexander remained undetectable. While his brothers wielded obvious brilliance, Alexander dissolved into every environment seamlessly. He left no trail, no suspicion. He perfected the art of thriving by vanishing into the very fabric of trust. Baltimore became merely a hub. Their influence stretched into New York, Philadelphia, and Washington. Each city bore invisible scars, bankruptcies, scandals, sudden resignations. The pattern was clear only to those who knew the bloodline. Whispers grew in political circles. Some suspected a network manipulating outcomes, but no one could prove it. Each Blackwood son operated separately, leaving no evidence. Yet together, their influence reached higher than any single dynasty. Daniel praised them privately. He told them they had surpassed him, but even in praise he reminded them, "Never reveal yourselves. The poison works only when unseen. Once exposed, the weapon is broken." The sons obeyed. They cultivated visibility only as masks. James spoke publicly at banquets. Nathan appeared in financial magazines. Victor wrote scholarly essays. Alexander shook hands at charity galas. None revealed the rot beneath. Men across the country trusted them. They invited them into homes, into campaigns, into boardrooms. Every handshake sealed dependency. Every conversation added a chain. The Blackwoods no longer manipulated households. They manipulated nations. Their greatest strength lay in diversity of methods. One used charm, one used money, one used fear, one used concealment. Together, they were undefeatable. No institution could withstand attacks on every front simultaneously. By the late 1980s, whispers of their dominance spread in whispers among powerful men. Some avoided crossing them. Others sought alliances. Either way, the result was the same. The Blackwoods dictated outcomes unseen. James ensured presidents owed him favors. Nathan controlled information through newspapers. Victor owned secrets of corporate titans. Alexander shaped policy through disguised philanthropy. Their reach extended into every corridor of power, cloaked beneath normalcy. Daniel died officially of a heart attack in 1995. Yet rivals who crossed him in his final years perished mysteriously afterward. His sons managed those ends, ensuring his death strengthened their aura of fear. Even in death, Daniel's influence persisted. His sons carried his poison into every chamber of power, perfecting his method of destruction. They didn't destroy openly. They corroded slowly, so institutions collapsed under their own weight. The Blackwood name rarely appeared in scandals. Investigators chasing trails found nothing. Each paper trail dissolved into smoke. Each lead ended abruptly. Their power thrived precisely because it could never be pinned down. The curse had evolved. No longer limited to a farmhouse, no longer confined to brothers, it had seeped into governments, banks, and media. The Blackwoods poisoned entire nations, smiling as men applauded them. In high places, their poison worked best. Respectability shielded them. Authority amplified them. They weren't feared criminals, they were admired leaders. That duality ensured their survival, while every victim perished quietly, unheard, and forgotten. By the millennium, their dominance was unshakable. America itself bore their fingerprints. Laws bent subtly, industries collapsed strategically, elections shifted quietly. And always the Blackwood sons remained invisible, cloaked in applause and trust. Daniel's prophecy was fulfilled. The poison in his veins had reached every chamber of power, and his sons, his perfected heirs, had proven that the deadliest predators never roar. They whisper, they smile, they blend. By the 21st century, the Blackwood dynasty had become untraceable. Their names rarely appeared in headlines, yet their fingerprints lingered across politics, finance, and culture. The poison Daniel perfected pulsed quietly through modern institutions. James managed foundations funding countless campaigns. Politicians smiled beside him, unaware they were being chained. His donations seemed generous, but each coin carried obligations that bound leaders permanently, twisting governments toward Blackwood control. Nathan dominated regional media. His investment firms purchased local papers, silencing uncomfortable stories. Entire scandals vanished before publication. Towns believed in clean leadership, never realizing their news was filtered through Nathan's invisible grip. Victor thrived as a manipulator of minds. He convinced powerful executives to confess sins, then weaponized their words. Companies collapsed under manufactured scandals. Rivals destroyed themselves, never knowing Victor's hand had pulled the threads. Alexander's reach was broadest. He sat quietly on boards of charities and corporations. Men adored his loyalty, yet behind polished agreements, he siphoned wealth into networks funding operations that poisoned entire industries with hidden agendas. Together, they perfected Daniel's design. Unlike their father, they didn't seek recognition. They sought invisibility. Their influence wasn't shouted in newspapers. It whispered in contracts, whispered in boardrooms, whispered in backroom agreements sealed with handshakes. Old men who remembered Robert spoke of discipline and fear. Younger men spoke only of opportunity, often provided by a Blackwood heir. They never realized they were stepping into webs woven generations earlier. The curse no longer looked like bruises or broken homes. It looked like economic collapse, manipulated elections, disappearing investigations. It was poison diluted into systems, spreading silently until entire structures crumbled from within. Even within their bloodline, rivalry remained. The brothers competed constantly for influence, for territory, for dominance. But unlike ordinary rivalries, theirs only sharpened the dynasty. Competition made them sharper predators, never weaker. Investigators tried uncovering them. A journalist traced patterns in campaign donations. Another dug into sudden bankruptcies. Both died in accidents months apart. Whispers suggested otherwise, but no proof ever surfaced. Fear silenced further inquiries. Archivists in Pennsylvania discovered letters Daniel had written as a teenager. They described manipulation, control, and design. Yet the papers were dismissed as the ramblings of youth. The truth was too dark to accept. The Blackwood line flourished quietly. Dozens of descendants spread across cities, some carrying the curse fully, others diluted. Some worked openly in politics, others in business, others hidden in shadows. All carried traces of Daniel's design. Townsmen occasionally noticed patterns. Where a Blackwood son appeared, chaos followed. Deals collapsed, alliances fractured, men ruined. Yet blame was never placed correctly. Misfortune wore many masks, and the dynasty ensured suspicion never reached them. The youngest generations grew even more dangerous. Some carried charm without cruelty, some intelligence without malice. but enough inherited the complete pattern to ensure the poison lived. Daniel's blueprint was alive, spreading invisibly. By 2003, the last elder voice's warning of the curse fell silent. Men who tried to resist found themselves bankrupt, discredited, or forgotten. No one listened anymore. The dynasty had buried resistance beneath reputation. Alexander controlled charities shaping elections. Victor harvested secrets of corporate elites. Nathan directed media narratives. James bought governments outright. Their combined influence reached farther than Daniel himself had ever envisioned during his darkest reflections. Yet they rarely appeared together. Their power thrived on separation, ensuring no one traced patterns easily. Each man represented a different arena, yet together they encircled entire societies in a net of influence. Whispers in Washington suggested unseen hands steering policies. Bankers in New York muttered about invisible pressures shaping markets. Men in small towns felt invisible chains tightening. All roads, though unseen, led back to Blackwood blood. Daniel's death had not ended the curse. It had strengthened it. His sons proved his theories correct. Poison spreads, adapts, survives. It flows like water, taking shape wherever opportunity allows. The legacy became myth. Some dismissed it as conspiracy, others as superstition. Yet those who stood too close to Blackwood interests often fell, stripped of wealth, credibility, or life itself, leaving silence in their place. By the 2010s, the dynasty existed everywhere yet nowhere. Their names appeared in foundations, firms, and councils, but their true power lay in what remained hidden, networks invisible to ordinary men. The youngest descendants attended elite schools, mingling with sons of senators and bankers. They wore friendly smiles, spoke of loyalty, and concealed fangs sharpened by generations. The predator's mask was perfected, passed effortlessly from father to son. Historians occasionally stumbled upon Daniel's story, the boy who killed his father. But official records sanitized the tale. It became a tragedy of survival, not the blueprint of generational predation it truly was. Even now, the curse haunts silently. It thrives not in shadows alone, but in plain sight. Men shake hands with Blackwood heirs daily, never realizing they've invited poison into their lives, their careers, their bloodlines. The legacy of the Blackwoods isn't bound to one farmhouse or one city. It has become woven into America itself. The curse doesn't end. It mutates, adapts, and spreads endlessly across generations. One truth remains undeniable. The boy who poisoned his bloodline succeeded. He built a dynasty of predators wearing masks of respectability. And today, those descendants still walk among us, their poison as lethal as ever. The story ends not with resolution, but with warning. When power hides behind charm, when loyalty feels too perfect, when misfortune spreads without reason, look closely. A Blackwood son may already be standing there. The legacy that haunts us isn't myth or superstition. It is history alive, flowing silently through bloodlines. Daniel's curse didn't die. It lives, in every son, in every handshake, in every poisoned future.